Let's begin for today. As the final lecture of the environmental section and of bio issues, I want to review and summarize environmentalism. And as typical, I want to always go back to and begin with the Bible. What is a biblical view of the environment? All right, all three things in the statement here are important. First of all, God created the environment, and He maintains direct control over it. And the third point is that God determines man's place in it. Man is not just a part of the environment like the animal kingdom and the plants and so forth. Man is above the environment. Remember, we talked about a proper view of man being important in our view of the environment. So what is a biblical view of the environment? Environmental issues are going to change. They're going to come and go and vary. So we have to begin with and maintain a biblical view of the environment. Also, as we're thinking about the environment, we need to remember that the earth is in God's hands. Global issues are not in our control. The earth is in God's hands. Here's a verse in Jeremiah 12:10, that kind of summarizes our biblical worldview. Okay, God made the earth by His power. He established it. Okay? And this, of course, is the foundation of a proper worldview of the environment, a proper worldview, and then it extends to a proper view of the environment. And the problem with environmentalists is they don't acknowledge God. They've taken God out of the picture, so the view of environmentalism is extreme. Don't forget worldview. In general, what is a worldview? Why is it important? It's a core belief. It's important, and it's going to affect the rest of your beliefs and your opinions. So your worldview affects your view of the environment. And remember, it's also a fundamental orientation of a society. So more and more people around us do not have a biblical worldview and are going to jump on every issue that comes along. As a review, you know that there are three basic categories. I'm reviewing this because it's a part of the semester exam. You need to remember the three main categories. Theism is a category of which, of course, the biblical worldview is a theistic worldview. And as the ultimate truth, there is one God. Now, if we have a biblical worldview, we take that further and say that that one God is the God of the Bible. Then we have atheism or naturalism. Both of those are the same idea. The ultimate truth there is that there is no God. And pantheism. Everything is God. All of you, I hope, also still have your handouts. Here they are again. You need to understand those different worldviews, including the newer one, which is the pantheistic worldview. More and more, we've got a big group of people in our country that have a very pantheistic view, especially of the environment. And of course, you know that with environmentalism, I'm going to get the pointer here. What's happening is that nature is deified, and Mother Nature not only becomes nature is personified, and then it is even deified. We have some related views here, related associated beliefs and religions. New Age is very pantheistic, and that's the form that pantheism takes in the United States. All right, so make sure you study the different worldviews and understand them, because they do affect your view of everything we've talked about this semester. So our environment does hinge on our proper view of the environment, begins with a proper view of God, proper view of man, then we will have the proper view of the environment. If we believe that God is the sovereign creator, if we believe that man is God's special creation, we aren't going to lump humanity in with the rest of the environment. And we will understand that God created and controls the environment. And we are not going to jump on every environmental issue that comes our way. Here again is the biblical worldview. This is a specific worldview. It is a type of theism. With the biblical worldview, where it applies to environmentalism, is right here. The Bible is a key to understanding the world. So when we're dealing with the environment, we want to go to the Bible. Now that's something that others will scoff at us about. The Bible's not a science book, and so on and so forth. So, biblical worldview. Environmental issues are going to change. The medical issues and the bioethics section that we dealt with, those things will change. That's why we have to have a solid foundation in the Bible. Here is a review for you of the biblical view of God. This is on the exam. So you need to make sure that you have it. Here's the biblical view of man. Created in God's image. He's not part of the environment. Distinct and separate from the animals. He's not a part of the environment. Man has an eternal spirit. That's the spiritual nature that belongs exclusively to man. And of course, man has a sin nature, and that has impacted the world that we live in. So you need to make sure that you have a biblical foundation. So your biblical view of man, your biblical view of God rather, and then your biblical view of man will add up to a proper view of the environment. So as I said, environmental issues are going to change. Different things are going to come and go. We have to have a biblical foundation by which we live our life. Here is the Bible principles. There are 6 of them. You need to know them. Okay, the environment was created by God. That's obvious. So what was it created with? It was created with design, and it shows order. As we talked about climate change or global warming, what did we say about the atmosphere? It does what God designed it to do, and it does it very well. The environment has purpose. God's glory, ultimately, but also man's use. Okay, we can't discount God's sovereignty when we're looking at environmental issues. God created and sustains the earth, and it's all in His hands, not ours. But of course, we do have environmental problems. Why? The universe was corrupted. How was it corrupted? A little bit too bright there, but the principle is by man's sin and disobedience. So you need to know the Bible principles. It's not possible for us to go through and explain all the environmental issues, and they're going to change anyways. So live your life by Bible principle. Here's the remaining ones. God gave man dominion. Remember, God determines our place in the environment. And also God's sovereignty. Here's stewardship and God's sovereignty. 2 very important Bible principles that apply directly to the environment. How do they apply to the environment? Okay, God determines man's place in it. Stewardship, God gave us dominion, but that doesn't excuse our responsibility. And then God's sovereignty. God maintains direct control over the environment. It's going to end, the earth is going to end how and when and why God wants it to. It's no wonder our view of the environment is out of proportion in our culture, because we do not have a proper view of God, a proper view of man, therefore we don't have a proper view of the environment. Remember, if we have a theistic view of the environment, especially if we have a biblical view of the environment, we will approach it with stewardship. If we're atheistic and materialistic, we might have a tendency to exploit the environment. So how does each main worldview approach environmental issues? As a biblical Christian, you will approach it with stewardship. If you're not, you may tend to exploit it. Or you may go to the other extreme of worshiping, where Mother Nature is personified and then even deified. So all of this, all of our teaching on environmental issues needs to boil down to, do you have a biblical foundation in your life? Do you live your life by Bible principle? So if you do, our key word is stewardship. And stewardship, as we've covered numerous times, involves conservation. Okay, not being wasteful. Responsibility. We make wise use of our resources. We make wise use of the environment around us. We're not destructive. We're not exploiting the environment. So having a biblical view of the environment does not include exploitation. And then innovation, what is that? That's new technologies. Should we be focusing on new technology? Absolutely. Should we try to cut down on our fossil fuel use? Yes, but not by government regulation, but by innovation, giving incentives and driving for more fuel-efficient vehicles, more better environmental filters, and so forth. So innovation, new technology is the way we need to go. What is environmentalism? Remember, it's extreme, it's overemphasis, and many environmentalists are very religious in nature. So it's very pantheistic. And of course, the environment is put above man. Because if it's pantheistic, we're elevating it to the level of deity. We've had this slide before. What are the extreme views of environmentalism? Mother Nature. It's pantheistic. And then look at the view of man. Okay, this kind of replaces a proper view of God, doesn't it? This replaces a proper view of man. And this replaces the proper view of the environment. Proper view of God becomes pantheism. Mother Nature. And you see all kinds of things along these lines, even if they're very subtle. And then here's what happens to our proper view of man. No longer is he God's special creation, but he's just a blight on the earth. And then our proper view of the environment is also changed. Okay? We have to save the earth. Now here I want to go through and illustrate these better. We've talked about the fact that environmentalists are known to manipulate their data. It's important to realize that a lot of the science behind some of the environmental issues does not stand up to close scientific scrutiny. It's biased. Then we've all seen the alarming results. Let me go back to that. We've all seen the alarming results and the pictures that are promoted by the news media, by entertainment, and by public education. Blaming the wrong causes, proposing the wrong solutions. So let's go through these. Of course, this is very political. That's what we meant by green is the new red. All right, back in the 60s, 70s, and so forth, we had the Cold War and communism, represented by red. That threat has now been replaced by environmentalism. So environmentalism, green, is the new red because it's replaced communism as a threat. What are those three things mentioned earlier that there's a threat to? Remember, our national autonomy, our national economy, and our personal liberties. So green is the new red. Here, again, you should have already have this down, I'm reviewing. When we're talking about manipulation of data and even fabrication of data, it involves when we claim there's a scientific consensus. It involves manipulating statistics. It involves biased computer models. And there's tactic number 2. What 3 things are involved in tactic number 2? Media manipulation. I'll give you a hint. I did change the slide there. All right? Scare tactics and emotional appeals. You're going to see these 4 tactics and these 3 things over and over again. Get it in your mind. When we're talking about environmental issues and when we're trying to look at a news article with discernment, we need to be looking for manipulation of data. We need to be looking for alarming results and exaggerations. Where do we find these? What's an example of these things? So let's go through the first tactic. What do I mean by, of course, the first tactic? What is it? I try to make it sound nice. Fabrication. You know, we manipulate, we exaggerate to the point of fabrication. A lot of it is plain and simple deception. Political agenda. All right, so the first tactic involved here, or the first example of tactic number 1, is scientific consensus. What does that mean? Many times environmentalists will appeal to a scientific consensus. The introductory paragraph of the article will say something like 97% of scientists. What does that mean? Where do they get 97%? What kind of scientists? What poll was used? Who was polled? So things like that are things that should be in your mind when you're reading things. All right? That has the connotation that everybody believes that. Now, what do you know about science? That's not how science works. You did read the article on global warming. Science isn't run by consensus. Okay? The author of that article said, we don't make scientific decisions, we don't prove scientific theory with a show of hands. That's what we're referring to here. So scientific consensus doesn't mean anything as far as the scientific method goes. In fact, what drives science forward? Questioning the status quo. That's good in science. Not just always saying, well, everybody believes it, it must be true. That's not very scientific. We get accused of being religious and non-scientific, don't we? And the point here is they're no different. They want to make you feel inferior or ostracized when you hear statements like most scientists or even all scientists and so forth. Scientist, that's a very vague reference. The next thing in the first tactic, and remember, let's be honest, this first tactic involves a lot of deception. The next thing is manipulated statistics. Okay, I showed you what you can do with a computer program just by changing the y-axis. Let's look at an actual one. This is a report debunking Mayor Bloomberg, who is the mayor of New York, a very vocal environmentalists. All right, they're going to show that we have global warming after 1880. But then other people will say there is no warming. Well, what's been done here on these graphs is they've been manipulated and massaged and made to look one way. When we add to the graph and show the actual values where they can be read and understood, the same graph looks like this. Okay, what does this say? 0 degrees Celsius, this is the years 1880 to 1924. What are you seeing? Anthropogenic, what does that mean? Man-made. Then the next block of time, we see 0.2 degrees Celsius. Is that going to have drastic climatic effects globally? What do you think? That doesn't look very dramatic, does it? And then we have, the next one is 1947 to 1976. Oh yes, that's right, remember? That's when the scare of the day was global cooling and the coming ice age, remember, in the 70s? Then, of course, we have to switch to, oh, we've got some global warming going on here. And here we are now. All right, so the point is, Anybody with any computer skills can make a graph look and say what they want it to say. Both ways. Both ways. So are we going to live our life based on man's science? No. We can take the same data and come to two entirely different results. That happens a lot in the creation-evolution debate, doesn't it? We take the same data and interpret it differently. How do you interpret it? Based on your what? Worldview. So this is true of environmental issues as well. So, remember our question, is it man-made? Can't make really a very strong case for that at all because of manipulation of statistics. What's really going on with the Arctic sea cap, the ice caps with Arctic Sea? It's going down. But I found this. What's going on here in August 2012 and August 2013? What is the point that I'm trying to make here with all of this? I'm going to ask you the question, is global warming occurring? And the answer is, depends on what you mean by global warming. Not the global warming that we're talking about as far as an environmental issue, not climate change that we hear so much about. All right? It just depends. And are there trends where global temperature rises? Yes, but then it cools and it rises. What's really going on is a cyclic warming and cooling trends that have been going on for decades and decades and decades. Do we need this alarmist, extreme environmental climate crisis that we're hearing about? We don't. All right, so the first tactic is out-and-out deception, manipulating data, exaggerating to the point of fabrication. Biased computer models. All right, we saw this slide with respect to global warming in the previous lecture. All right, prediction is not scientific in the sense of that it's going to be 100% accurate. It is a big part of science. That's what makes something a good theory or a good model, that it accurately predicts. Do we have accurate prediction going on here? Do we? No, and that's part of science. All right, environmental extremists need to admit these things and admit to the fact that they've overstated a lot of different things and actually deceived the American public, and especially the generation of children growing up in our public education. So, tactic number one is manipulation of data, exaggeration of fact to the point of fabrication, involving those three things. Second tactic, this one's even easier to see. Be on the lookout for exaggeration. We're trying to sell newspapers, are we not? So be on the lookout for exaggeration. Be on the lookout for media manipulation, scare tactics, emotional appeals, and recognize it for what it really is. What is it? Propaganda. So it's propaganda when we predict alarming results and exaggerate the effects of a problem. Media manipulation. Everywhere you look, what is the news media reporting? Remember, what is this? What do I want you to associate with media manipulation? The idea that we have selective reporting and we have alarmist reporting. That's what I mean by media manipulation. Selective reporting and alarming reporting. Climate change risks, more serious than expected. Is that true? Don't think so. Are we to blame? Oops, I went a little too fast there. Global warming, already a cause for alarm. Climate change is destroying our infrastructure. Flooding. That definitely is a local phenomenon. Is that true? That's a headline. Do you need to be suspicious of headlines? Yes, in our biased news media that we live in. Here that one is again, had to throw it in. There it is, saying something exactly opposite. Oh, that's more like our present news media, isn't it? Time magazine. Oh, what's on the cover? What do you see? Everybody, what do you see? The polar bear. Be worried, be very worried. Time magazine, not where you get your science from. Oh, I'm not familiar with this magazine, but Rise Up to Stop Global Warming. Toxic racism, all kinds of things on here. Oh, Nancy Pelosi, and we know who she is. Barbara Boxer. Not the crowd that I want to be in. So, propaganda. Scare tactics is the next part of propaganda, the next part of tactic number 2. Lots and lots of pictures like this. What is that? That's alarmist. Okay, remember in our global warming lecture, I showed you this slide. Scare tactics. Polar bears are drowning. That's also an emotional appeal, right? The next part of this tactic. There he is. I did tell you that that's a computer-generated photograph, or altered photograph. That is not a real photograph. So there's tactic number 2 and 3 ways that we will see it. Media manipulation, scare tactics, and emotional appeals. And don't forget the culture we live in. Who has control of the news media and the entertainment the entertainment industry and educational institutions? Who has control of that? The left. Okay. Remember, we have the entertainment in the news media. There they are. Selective and alarmist reporting. The entertainment industry conditions us with the little cute cartoons and then the dramatic disaster movies and all the computer graphics. And then, of course, education. Next thing I did is I pulled off the internet a bunch of political cartoons because I think they're interesting. Here's one. Overpopulation, global warming, fossil fuel dependence, pollution, rainforest, species. There's all the things we've been talking about. Poor little Earth. Okay. Here's an opposite one. Can you read it? Look at the selective reporting. Record snowfall. This is just a weather event. Plus, we don't call it global warming anymore. It's called climate change. 6 months later, global warming, record heat. Same idea, different perspective. I like this next one because I think it's pretty accurate. Scientific establishment. Global warming is absolute truth that should not be questioned. Look at the title of this article, Passengers Rescued from Ship Trapped in Ice. Why didn't they mention that it was on a global warming mission? Okay, you don't question it. This one is something that you need to realize. The title of this cartoon was Hick Mentality. So if you're a denier of global warming, you're a hick. What is that? Personal attack. Notice, we got mom, daughter, dad. Well, this ice storm surely proves that there, look at the grammar, ain't no global warming. Now look at the girl. Look at her phraseology. She's educated. Actually, Mom, warming disrupts terrestrial climate patterns, thereby producing extreme weather phenomena like the polar vortex. Do you see the personal attack there? Oh, no. We're in really bad shape here. Hush, gal. If I want science learning, I'll open a Bible. What is that? That's attack on you and I. That's how we're viewed. Let's be prepared. Okay? So we need to remember that we have all these outlets of who controls. Now, if you took first semester with creation science, remember we read the book by Philip Johnson, and he talked about who has the microphone. What did he mean? Who controls the news stories? Who controls entertainment? Who controls education? Okay, and so then our 4 tactics continue with blaming the wrong causes and proposing the wrong solutions. There's the 3 causes: overpopulation, human activities, too much industry. How can we summarize the 3rd tactic? I'm summarizing it as a political agenda. So we're going to blame the wrong cause. Remember? Exploding global population, 7.5 billion people, increasing at a rate of 1.1% annually. It's the global population bomb. 7 billion and counting. Population countdown. Too many people. What about our irresponsible human activities? All based in overconsumption. Remember? Overconsumption. Carbon emissions. We're not using renewable energy. We're destroying habitats. We're consuming our resources. We're destroying habitats. Animals are going extinct. Oh, too much industry. These are the same things we've been talking about. Fossil fuels, pollution. Oh, oil companies, Chevron, BP, well, of course, you know, poor BP with Exxon Valdez and so forth. Last tactic, wrong solutions. Population control, those 3. Government intervention, global cooperation. What are we calling this tactic? Government control. So we have deception, propaganda, political agenda, and that's going to end in government control. Do you know your 4 tactics? Can you summarize them? Deception, propaganda, political agenda, and the 4th tactic we can summarize as government control. We are proposing the wrong solutions. First and foremost is population control. Everything in our culture pushes this way. Smaller families, birth control, family planning. Okay, remember family planning is code for abortion. We want to achieve 0 population growth globally. Of course, the next wrong solution is government intervention, taxes, industrial regulations, personal restrictions. And the last one, let me skip that back. Remember, we're proposing the wrong solutions. The second one is government intervention. And then the third one is global cooperation. Remember, green is the new red. It is a threat to our national autonomy, not just our national economy, and not just our personal restrictions. All right, the Cold War is over. Now we have the Green War. It replaces that. Should the government increase environmental regulations to prevent climate change? No. Several reasons. They're not going to work very well, is one reason. We're not going to be able to change global climatic patterns by reducing so-called carbon footprints. The effect will be negligible and it'll be very expensive. And the second thing would be we already have enough government regulations. If anything, we should be relaxing them so that and giving incentives. So what can industry do? Spend money defending itself in court? Spend money enforcing and complying to government regulation, or spend money on research and development, better fuel economy, more energy efficient, better ways to harness solar energy. Let's start doing innovation, not regulation. So that brings us to the conclusion of the entire environmental section. Stewardship balance, right? And here, remember, we need to base our environmental views on the Bible, no matter if we're called a hick or a Bible thumper or ignorant. And those things will and do happen. And they're going to happen more and more. Okay? The design of the earth comes back to our biblical worldview. The earth, its atmosphere, and so forth was designed by an infinite God. Let's trust Him. End of the earth. This is reality just as much. A holy God is the ultimate judge. What does 1 Peter say about the end of the earth? There's the verse, or 2 Peter. 2 Peter 3:7. But the heavens and the earth, which are now, by the same word are kept in store. God is the sustainer. But the rest of the verse says it's reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. All right? That's just as much a part of our biblical worldview. 2 Peter 3:7. But back to what about the here and now? The care of the earth is in God's hands. An infinite God is the creator, and He is the sustainer. Here's that verse again, Genesis 8:22. So I want to finish with Genesis 8:22. You can see the seasons. One of the nice things about living in the Midwest is we have all 4 seasons. All right, so while the earth remaineth, what are we going to have? We're going to have seed time, right, and harvest. We're going to have cold and heat. We're going to have summer and winter. We're going to have what? Day and night. So here's the conclusion of our environmental issues. Let's end with the Bible. Genesis 8:22, while the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, and summer and winter, and night and day, what? Shall not cease until God decides that it will. Remember, the earth is reserved unto judgment, but right now, God is still sustaining the environment, no matter what the news media, entertainment industry, or educational institutions want us to think.